In the quiet village of Mbanza, where red soil met the whispering wind, lived a woman named Lemba, whose beauty was like fire, bright enough to draw attention, but dangerous enough to burn whoever came too close. She was admired by every man who saw her, envied by every woman who heard her name, and yet loved by none in truth. Lemba had a smile that could melt a warrior's heart and a tongue sweet as palm wine, but behind her beauty lay greed and an unending hunger for luxury. She used her charm to gain gifts, power, and favor from men already bound to others, men who risked their families just to please her. Every day she adorned herself in bright wrappers and beads given by men who belonged to other women, and each night she slept peacefully under the roof of her mother, unaware that the ancestors watched her every step. The villagers whispered about her, calling her the breaker of homes, but no one dared confront her directly, for she was known to curse those who angered her with a stare that chilled the soul. Yet, deep within her, there was a restlessness she could not explain, a feeling that the spirits of the land disapproved of her path. Her mother, an old woman named Nabo, often warned her, "My child, no beauty stays forever. When you take joy from others' pain, the gods take notice." But Lemba would laugh and say, "The gods have better things to do than watch me." One moonless night, she dreamt of standing in a great forest surrounded by the wailing of unseen women. The trees bled red sap, and shadows called her name. When she tried to run, the earth turned to mud beneath her feet, pulling her down. She woke with a scream, drenched in sweat, her body trembling. She told herself it was just a nightmare. But from that day onward, strange things began to happen. Chickens stopped laying eggs when she passed. Mirrors in her hut cracked on their own. And when she looked into water, she sometimes saw not her reflection, but a pale face of an old woman staring back. The village priest, an old man named Embe, came to her house one afternoon, holding a staff made from sacred Iroko wood. "Lemba," he said, "your beauty blinds you from seeing what the ancestors have seen. The spirits are restless. You have stolen peace from families, and now peace will be stolen from you." Lemba laughed in his face and said, "Let the spirits come. I fear no shadow." But when the sun fell that evening, her laughter turned into tears. For the first time, her heart grew heavy. The whispers of the spirits followed her even in daylight, echoing through the rustling trees and the sound of distant drums. Her reflection began to fade in mirrors, as if the world itself was slowly erasing her. Lemba did not yet understand that her punishment had already begun. Days turned into weeks, and Lemba's once glorious life began to twist into something she could not control. The same men who once brought her gifts now avoided her gaze, whispering behind closed doors that her beauty had become cursed. Their wives, once silent in their suffering, now stood tall in the market, their eyes burning with both anger and triumph. Even the children ran away when she passed by, murmuring that the spirits walk beside her. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon and the smell of burning wood filled the air, Lemba sat alone by her doorway. The wind blew strangely. That night it carried voices that were not human. When she listened closely, she could hear the faint cry of women, like echoes from deep underground. Suddenly, her mother Nabo appeared from the shadows, her old face pale with fear. "Child," she whispered, I went to the priest today. He says the spirits of those women you have wronged are calling your name. You must beg for forgiveness before the moon turns full." But Lemba, still clinging to pride, shook her head and said, "No spirit can harm me, mother. The gods only punish those who steal. I have taken nothing but love freely given." Nabo's eyes filled with tears. "Love stolen from another woman's heart is not freely given," she said softly. "It is a curse disguised as desire." That night, as Lemba lay on her mat, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, no one was there, only footprints glowing faintly in the dirt. Terrified, she closed the door and hid under her cloth, praying for dawn. But as she drifted into uneasy sleep, the dream returned, this time clearer. She stood again in the forest, but now she could see faces among the trees. Women with hollow eyes and long, tangled hair, whispering her name. One stepped forward and said, "You took our peace, now yours shall be taken." Lemba awoke, screaming. Her mother rushed in, finding her daughter shaking violently, her skin cold as stone. By morning, she had lost her voice. Her tongue felt heavy, her words refused to come. The priest Mbe was summoned again. He entered the hut, chanting softly as he sprinkled sacred water. "The spirits have begun their work," he said gravely. "Only repentance and a cleansing ritual in the sacred forest can save her now." Lemba tried to speak, but no sound escaped her lips. The villagers gathered outside, whispering that justice had come from the ancestors themselves. Even those who once desired her now pitied her. The priest ordered her to fast and prepare to journey at dawn to the sacred grove, where she would face the judgment of the spirits. That night, as Lemba watched the moonlight slip through the cracks in her roof, she felt her soul tremble. For the first time, she wished she had listened to her mother's warnings. She knew that when the morning came, her life would never be the same again. The first light of dawn spread across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson as Lemba began her journey to the sacred grove. Her mother walked beside her, clutching a small calabash filled with river water, blessed by the priest, while the villagers followed at a cautious distance. No one dared come too close, for they believed the spirits that haunted her might leap upon any soul who touched her shadow. The priest Mbe led the way, his chants echoing through the morning mist, each word a plea for mercy from the ancestors. The forest loomed ahead like a living thing, ancient trees twisting toward the heavens, their roots curling through the earth like snakes. Birds went silent as they entered, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The deeper they walked, the heavier the air became, until the sunlight faded and the grove opened into a clearing where an old stone altar stood, covered in moss and carved symbols of forgotten gods. Mbe motioned for Lemba to kneel. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of guilt pressing against her chest. For the first time, she felt the presence of those she had wronged, not in anger, but in sorrow. The priest poured the river water over her head, whispering, "Let the spirits wash away what greed has stained." But before the final chant was spoken, the earth beneath her began to shake. The trees groaned, and a low hum rose from the ground, like the growl of a great beast. A gust of wind blew through the grove, extinguishing the priest's sacred torch. When the light returned, figures stood among the trees, ghostly shapes of women, each one pale as moonlight, their eyes empty yet full of pain. One stepped forward, her face half hidden behind strands of long black hair. "Lemba of Imbanza," she said, in a voice that echoed from everywhere and nowhere, "you feasted on hearts that were not yours. You drank joy from others' tears. Why do you now cry for mercy?" Lemba tried to speak, but her voice was still lost. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, begging silently. The spirits encircled her, their whispers rising like the sound of distant rain. Her mother fell to her knees, crying, "Please, she has learned her lesson. Spare her." But the spirits did not listen. They raised their arms, and the wind swirled into a cyclone of leaves and dust. Lemba's beads snapped from her neck, scattering across the ground like broken promises. The spirits spoke in unison. "You will walk among the living, unseen but not forgotten, until your heart learns to feel what theirs once felt." Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. The forest grew silent again. When Lemba opened her eyes, she found herself lying alone before the altar. Her mother and the priest gone, her village nowhere in sight. She called out, but her voice was still hollow, echoing only inside her head. Panic surged through her. She was alive, but something was terribly wrong. As she stumbled back toward the path, the trees seemed to move, closing behind her like prison walls. Lemba didn't yet realize that the spirits had not killed her. They had cursed her with a life far worse than death, to live among people who could no longer see her, a wandering shadow in the land of the living. The forest was silent, except for the rustle of distant leaves as Lemba stumbled through the narrow path, her feet bare, her spirit trembling. When she finally reached the edge of the woods, she saw her village, but it was not as she had left it. Children played in the dust, women pounded yams, men returned from the fields, and smoke curled lazily from the cooking fires. Yet none of them turned their heads when she cried their names. She ran toward her mother's hut and burst inside, her chest tight with panic. There sat Nabo, her eyes red from weeping, her wrinkled hands clutching a piece of cloth that once belonged to Lemba. "She is gone," her mother whispered to a neighbor. "The spirits took her soul." Lemba froze, realizing with horror that she was standing right in front of them, shouting, waving her arms, yet they looked through her as if she were made of air. She reached out to touch her mother's shoulder, but her hand passed through it like smoke. Fear surged through her body, but the fear soon turned into sorrow. She watched as her mother lit a candle before a clay statue and prayed for her lost child's peace. Lemba sank to her knees, weeping silently, understanding now the weight of her sin. For days she wandered the village, invisible and voiceless, watching the lives she had once interfered with. The men who had pursued her now avoided even her old house, fearing her spirit's wrath. Their wives, once broken-hearted, had begun to heal, finding peace in the arms of their children and faith in their gods. Lemba wanted to beg their forgiveness, but all she could do was watch. At night, when the village slept, she wandered beyond the fields where the moonlight kissed the earth. There, she saw reflections of her past visions shimmering in the air like ghosts of memory. She saw herself laughing while another woman cried. She saw herself wearing bracelets gifted by hands that once held another. Each vision burned into her soul until she fell to the ground, screaming soundlessly. "Please," she thought, "let me make it right." But the spirits only whispered, "Not yet." One night, as the rains came and thunder roared across the sky. She saw a small child lost near the riverbank. Though invisible, she ran toward him, her spirit guiding his steps away from the water's edge until he found his way home. The boy looked back once, as if sensing something, and smiled. For the first time since her curse began, Lemba felt a warmth in her heart, a flicker of purpose. From that night onward, she began to use her unseen existence to do good. She whispered to mothers where danger lurked. She guided hunters away from traps. And she stood over children in their sleep, protecting them from harm. Slowly, the whispers of angry spirits around her began to fade. In their place came softer voices, voices of forgiveness carried by the wind. Still, she knew her journey was far from over. Redemption in the eyes of the ancestors could not be earned in a day. Yet for the first time, Lemba walked beneath the moonlight, not as a woman of shame, but as a shadow learning to serve the light. Seasons changed over Mbanza, and though years passed like dust carried by the wind, Lemba remained bound between the world of the living and the unseen. Time could not touch her, but her soul grew weary of wandering. She had watched her mother grow older, her hair turning as white as river foam, her back bent with grief, still whispering prayers to the gods to grant her daughter peace. Each prayer struck Lemba's heart like a blade, for she knew it was her own choices that had brought such sorrow to the one who had loved her most. One morning, as the first rains of the new season fell, she followed her mother to the edge of the forest. Nabo carried an offeringa, bowl of yam, palm oil, and kola, nuts to the shrine of the ancestors. Kneeling before the sacred stones, she said softly, "Ancestors, if you still hear me, I beg of you, if my child wanders lost, show her the way home." The wind stirred gently, and though Nabo could not see it, Lemba knelt beside her, tears falling onto the same earth. "Mother," she whispered, though no sound came. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and for a brief moment Nabo smiled faintly, feeling her daughter's spirit near. That night, Lemba stood before the old priest Mbe's hut, where his spirit now resided beyond the veil of life. His ghostly figure emerged, his staff glowing faintly. "You have walked long, child," he said, his voice deep and calm. "The ancestors have seen your change, but to lift the curse, you must give back what you once took." Lemba bowed her head. "Tell me how." Mbe raised his staff toward the stars. "You took peace from many hearts. Now you must restore it. There is one who still suffers because of you, the woman whose husband you lured with false promises. Her tears keep your curse alive." Lemba remembered the woman Abeni, a weaver with kind eyes. She found her the next morning, still alive but old, her hands frail, her eyes dim from years of sadness. Abeni lived alone, her children having moved far away. Each night she lit a lamp for her lost joy, unaware that the woman who caused it now stood beside her, unseen. Lemba fell to her knees and wept. As her tears hit the ground, the lamp flickered and Ebony's head lifted. "Who's there?" she whispered. The air grew warm, filled with the scent of jasmine, and though she saw no one, she felt peace flood her chest for the first time in years. That night, she dreamed of a woman in white, kneeling before her, whispering, "Forgive me." When she awoke, her heart felt light, and she smiled a smile she had not known for decades. In that moment, Lemba's spirit began to glow faintly, her body made of light and dust. She realized the ancestors had accepted her act of repentance. The voices that once haunted her now sang softly in her ears, a melody of forgiveness and release. She looked toward the heavens and whispered, "Thank you." The dawn rose, and for the first time since her curse began, Lemba felt warmth on her face. The light didn't pass through her, it embraced her. She turned toward her mother's hut, watching her sleep peacefully, and whispered, "Soon, Mama, soon I will find peace." Then she vanished into the morning mist, her shadow melting into sunlight, leaving behind only the faint echo of a song carried by the wind. The dawn that followed was unlike any other. The air over Mbanza shimmered with strange calm, as though the world itself had paused to listen. Far beyond the edge of the village, in the sacred forest where her curse had begun, Lemba's spirit took form one last time. She was no longer the frightened shadow who had run from her past. She now shone like the morning sun, her face peaceful, her eyes clear as the river after rain. The forest seemed to recognize her change, the trees bowed gently. The wind whispered her name with tenderness instead of accusation. From within the mist, the spirits of the women she had once wronged appeared again. Their faces were no longer filled with pain, but with quiet grace. The first among them, the one who had once spoken her judgment, stepped forward. "Lemba of Mbanza," she said, "your heart has changed, and the ancestors have seen it. The curse placed upon you is lifted." Lemba bowed deeply, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. "I do not ask to live again," she said softly, "only that my story be remembered, so that others may not fall into the same darkness." The spirit smiled and replied, "Then your lesson shall live beyond you." With that, the forest filled with light. The ground beneath Lemba's feet glowed with golden patterns, the sacred marks of forgiveness. Her spirit rose slowly, turning into a stream of radiant dust that drifted upward. At that same moment, back in the village, Nabo awoke suddenly to a soft voice calling her name. She stepped outside and saw the first rays of sunlight falling through the mist. A warm breeze brushed her cheek, carrying the faint scent of her daughter's perfume. "Go in peace, my child," she whispered, her eyes shining. For the first time since Lemba's disappearance, the village felt alive again. The air grew lighter, crops flourished, and laughter returned to the market. The priest's successor declared that the spirits had forgiven the land. As for Lemba, her story became a tale told around fires on moonlit nights. Story mothers shared with their daughters and elders told to the young. They said she was the woman who once broke hearts for pleasure, but found redemption through pain. They said she was the spirit who walked unseen to protect children and bring peace to lonely souls. Her name, once spoken with bitterness, became a lesson in humility and change. The elders would always end her story with the same words: "No beauty lasts forever, but goodness can outlive death." And so, the tale of Lemba lived on through generations. A reminder that greed may bring temporary joy, but only kindness brings eternal peace. Somewhere beyond the veil, in the quiet realm of the ancestors, Lemba sat among the spirits of light, watching over Mbanza with gentle eyes. Her heart, once dark with pride, now glowed with the warmth of forgiveness. The winds that swept through the red soil village carried her voice, soft and eternal, whispering, "Learn from me and choose the path that heals, not the one that hurts.